Hey art nerds, today I'm going to walk you through day 30 of my 2019 Inktober challenge. The prompt was tomato, and I drew this cute illustration of a little guy carrying a tomato. So the first thing I do is I start with a thumbnail sketch. This is usually done on post-it note paper, done in pen and done really quickly, and it's just to help me nail down the composition and the general feel for the illustration. I really recommend doing thumbnails before you commit to something solid. I find that the resulting illustration turns out so much better. I'm also going to do my sketching with a pink color Eno pencil. I have a handy pencil eraser as well as a mono eraser as well as a art eraser. So lots of erasers. So I like sketching with this pink lead because it is very compatible with alcohol markers. It's also watercolor compatible and very erasable. So I begin by sketching the main body of the composition. I'm kind of blocking everything in and placing it on the paper. And I'm beginning with constructive human anatomy, and I have loads of really good tutorials on that topic. But basically we start with a rectangular form and a stick figure, and that kind of allows us to pose the figure. Then we sketch in the round tomato shape and the little oval head, and I begin kind of placing where the leaves are going to go in the rest of the composition. By kind of placing the figure first, since that's our focal point, that's our most important thing on the page, that's our action on the page, it allows me to place everything else in a way that is going to complement the figure and complement the action. So it's a kiddo with a giant tomato, holding a giant tomato, running and carrying one kind of attached to his side. So I kind of use the rule of thirds to place that tomato on the kind of first dividing line. And if you're interested in learning more about the rule of thirds and how that can help your compositions, I have a tutorial that I'll link right here. I'm also sketching in the ground and the tomatoes that are going to be hanging from the tomato vines in the background. Now that I have everything kind of roughly sketched in, I'm going to begin tightening things. So I'm starting by tightening up the rib cage, tightening up the figure. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm using Constructive Human Anatomy to help me do this. Now, Constructive Human Anatomy is way easier than it sounds. And while it takes a little while to learn, it's a system of understanding how the human figure is built so that you can deconstruct it and reconstruct it time and time again. And this is great because it allows you to consistently draw characters, and it can be super stylized, it can be very realistic. It's a very flexible way of learning how to draw. So make sure I pepper this tutorial with links to where you can learn more about that. I highly recommend it, and it's the system that I use when I'm drawing my comic pages and my illustrations. And it basically just relies on understanding a few basic geometric shapes like cylinders, like spheres, like cubes, and understanding how the whole world is broken down into these basic shapes. So it's really the crux of how I do all of my drawing. Even when I'm doing really cartoony stuff, even when I'm doing really stylized stuff, I utilize constructive anatomy. And if you're an art nerd on Patreon, you should have access to my From Stick to Figure presentation. This is a presentation that I teach at a variety of places, and its aim is to teach you the basics of constructive anatomy. So if you're an art nerd, make sure you check that presentation out. So once I have the figure kind of roughly constructed, roughly sketched in, I'm going to go ahead and break down the face. So human faces, people faces, even animal faces are still broken, can be broken down with constructive anatomy. And again, my art nerds on Patreon will have access to my Manga Madness presentation. This is just a presentation that shows basic facial construction as well as how you can develop your own style and learn from other artists. And once I have the face kind of sketched in, I begin designing his outfit. I have a few videos here on this channel about drawing clothing and folds as well, but generally my best recommendation is learn how to construct the figure and then just practice drawing people from fashion websites, clothing from fashion websites, clothing on real people, clothing on models. Just get as much practice as you can. So I am drawing the tomatoes a bit from reference. I have tomato reference pulled up, but I'm not copying it exactly. When I was doing this Inktober, I really wanted to focus on drawing plants more realistically. And now that I have everything kind of sketched in, I'm adding more details to his face and to his hair. And when I draw hair, I draw really stylized, cartoony hair, and I think of it as major forms rather than individual fine lines. So when I'm creating illustrations, I usually start from large details and then work my way smaller. So large forms to fine details. I generally try to avoid starting with the smaller details unless I'm just doodling in my sketchbook and I've got a specific thing in mind. But if I'm creating an illustration, it's easiest for me to start with the large details because if I place something wrong, if I need to fix something, it's easy to change it at that stage, and it's not like I'm erasing a face that I really liked or an outfit that looked really good. Now, if I have to erase a face I really liked or an outfit that looked really good, and I'm not recording with my phone, I will usually take a photo of it and send it to myself on Discord so I can reference it when I have to redraw it. This kind of takes away some of the sting of having to redraw things. All right, so now that I have this little dude sketched out, I am cross-referencing my thumbnail and kind of just sketching in some dirt clods. They're very stylistic dirt clods. This illustration is more of a stylized illustration, and for Inktober 2019, I was really focused on playing around with circular compositions, or more rounded compositions, I guess. I have a tendency to just fill the page. Maybe that comes from my comic artist life, but circular compositions were a lot of fun. So now I'm just kind of sketching in the tomato plant leaves, again working from reference so that I draw the leaves fairly accurately. Even if you have a cartoony style, drawing accurately can be important if you want it to be recognizable. And I use circles to denote and help me place where the flowers are going to be, and then I break those flowers down into kind of triangular petal shapes. Again, working heavily from reference. And for Inktober 2019, I also wanted to play around with drawing insects. A lot of insects are on the endangered species list and are kind of vulnerable, but because they're not as charismatic as larger animals, they don't get the attention. So one of the things I try to do, since I draw tiny people, is I try to portray insects generally in a very sympathetic light, and hopefully to engender some warm and fuzzy feelings towards animals and people. Or towards insects in people. So this tomato prompt has a lot of ladybugs, or ladybirds as you might call them. And I will admit, I'm not really an insect person myself, so I'm also hoping that drawing more insects will make me more fond of them. I draw a lot of bees, and since I started drawing bees, I've definitely become more fond of bees. So perhaps drawing a wider variety of insects will help me become more fond of insects. I'm not squeamish to them. I just don't really, I'm not attached either way, which is terrible. They're living creatures. So as you guys can see, I'm kind of developing my tomato leaves and my tomato foliage and tomatoes bit by bit, branch by branch, just kind of working my way along the composition. And if I wasn't recording this for you guys, I would be using a scrap piece of paper, like a piece of printer paper, to protect the page as I work my way across. And you guys can see I'm just kind of being patient, working my way along. I really enjoy sketching at this stage when things have been kind of planned out and I can just kind of relax and zone out and focus on what I'm drawing rather than trying to think of a composition or trying to make my composition work. And this is another reason why I really recommend you guys start with thumbnail sketches before you commit to a large illustration. It could even just be if you have like a precious sketchbook that you're kind of picky about what goes into it, like I am with my Inktober sketchbooks. You could do a thumbnail and that'll help you get your ideas out so you don't spend a lot of time erasing and redrawing, erasing and redrawing. And now we're just kind of adding the finishing touches. You guys can check out the time-lapse video where I ink this illustration here on the channel if you're curious. But I want to thank you guys so much for joining me today and drawing along with me. Hopefully this video has you feeling empowered and inspired to do some drawing of your own. I want to thank you guys again so much for hanging out with me. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, check the description and then hit me up in the comments down below. It's wonderful hanging out with you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys again really soon. Bye, guys!